I'm alone. Can I join you? A deaf woman signed to a single dad at a cafe, and his reaction changed everything. Before we continue, please tell us where in the world are you tuning in from? We love seeing how far our stories travel. Bennett Hayes sat at his usual corner table in Patty's Cafe on Southeast Morrison Street in Portland on a Saturday afternoon in late September, staring at the same inventory spreadsheet he'd been pretending to work on for the past 45 minutes. And he was drinking cold coffee that tasted like regret while watching happy couples and friend groups laugh at tables around him, wondering when exactly his life had turned into this empty routine of avoiding his own house on weekends. The thing about being a widower for 2 years is that people stop checking on you after the first year because they assume you're doing better. They assume time heals everything. But what they don't understand is that year two is somehow worse than year one because the shock wears off and you're left with just the plain, simple fact that the person you built your entire life around is never coming back, and you have to figure out how to exist anyway. Rachel died October 3rd, 2 years ago, in a car accident that happened so fast Bennett didn't even get to say goodbye. One phone call from the hospital, and his whole world just stopped. And now he spends every single Saturday at this cafe from 2 in the afternoon until closing because his 7-year-old daughter Stella goes to her grandmother's house on Saturdays. And being alone in their house makes Bennett feel like he's drowning. He runs a small independent bookshop 3 blocks away called Chapter and Verse that Rachel helped him open 6 years ago, back when they were young and stupid and thought love could conquer anything, including terrible business plans. And somehow the shop is still standing, even though half the time Bennett can barely remember to order new inventory or pay invoices on time. Stella is the only reason he gets out of bed most mornings. His brilliant, funny 7-year-old daughter, who was born profoundly deaf and communicates in American Sign Language. And Rachel had been a speech therapist specializing in deaf education, so their whole house had always been bilingual in English and ASL. Watching Stella grow up without her mom has been the hardest thing Bennett's ever experienced. Harder than his own grief, because at least he got 29 years of hearing people tell him they loved him out loud. But Stella barely remembers what it felt like to have Rachel sign goodnight to her, or wake her up for school with gentle hands shaking her shoulder. Bennett was about to pack up his laptop and head home to his empty house when he noticed a woman standing about 10 feet away from his table, holding a coffee cup and looking around the cafe with this expression on her face that he recognized immediately because he saw it in the mirror every single morning. Pure loneliness mixed with the kind of exhaustion that comes from pretending you're fine when you're absolutely not. She had dark curly hair pulled back in a messy bun, and she was wearing jeans and an oversized cardigan, and there was a golden retriever service dog sitting perfectly still beside her, with a vest that said hearing dog across the side. The woman scanned the whole cafe, which was pretty packed for a Saturday afternoon. Every table had at least 2 or 3 people talking and laughing, and Bennett watched her take this deep breath like she was gathering courage for something. She walked straight toward his table, and Bennett looked down at his laptop real quick because he figured she was going to ask if the other chair was taken so she could borrow it for another table. But instead, she set her coffee down right across from him, and her hands started moving in very deliberate, clear sign language. Her hands shaped the words, "I'm alone? Can I join you?" And she had this vulnerable, hopeful expression on her face, like she was fully expecting him to say no or look confused or do that thing hearing people do when they don't understand sign language, where they not just smile awkwardly and point somewhere else. Bennett's brain took maybe half a second to process what was happening, and then his hands moved automatically without him even thinking about it. Muscle memory from 7 years of signing with Stella every single day kicked in, and he signed back, "Of course, please sit down. I'm alone too." The woman's entire face transformed from nervous hope to complete shock. Her mouth literally fell open, and she almost knocked over her coffee cup, and she sat down so fast it was like her legs just gave out. She signed with hands that were shaking a little bit. "You know ASL? You can sign?" And Bennett nodded and signed back. "My daughter is deaf. She's 7. My late wife was a speech therapist who specialized in deaf education. Signing is pretty much my first language at home now." The woman pressed both hands against her mouth, and Bennett could see her eyes filling up with tears, and she signed, I just moved to Portland a month ago for work. I've been here for 4 weeks, and you are literally the first person who has signed back to me. Everyone else either completely ignores me or they talk really slow and super loud, like I'm stupid instead of just deaf. Bennett felt his chest get tight because he'd watched Stella experience that exact same thing 100 times. People treating her like she was broken or incapable just because she couldn't hear. And he signed, "I'm Bennett Hayes. This is my table every single Saturday afternoon. You're welcome to sit here whenever you want. You shouldn't have to eat alone." The woman wiped her eyes and signed back, "I'm Ivy Castellano. I'm a graphic designer and I work from home, which means I basically never see another human being except my dog Murray. And thank you for not making me feel like a weirdo for asking to sit with a complete stranger." They talked, well signed, for the next 2 hours straight, and Bennett completely forgot about his inventory spreadsheet and his cold coffee and the fact that he was supposed to be wallowing in grief. Because Ivy was funny and smart, and she got this light in her eyes when she signed about things she was passionate about, like design work and her dog, and how much she missed her parents who died 5 years ago in a plane crash. She explained that she'd been deaf since she was 4 years old after a bad case of meningitis, and she'd grown up in California, but moved to Portland because her freelance work meant she could live anywhere, and she wanted a fresh start somewhere. Nobody knew her story. Bennett told her about the bookshop and about Stella, and how his daughter was the only deaf kid in her mainstream elementary school. How she came home every day looking exhausted from trying to navigate a hearing world that wasn't built for her. How she'd never actually met another deaf adult besides family members, and Bennett was genuinely worried she was growing up thinking being deaf meant being alone forever. Ivy's hands moved fast and passionate when she signed, "Representation is so important." I didn't meet a deaf adult who was successful and happy until I was 16 years old, and it literally changed my entire life because suddenly I could see a future for myself. Stella needs that. She needs to see deaf people thriving, not just surviving. Bennett felt something crack open in his chest that had been sealed shut for 2 years. This tiny flicker of hope that maybe his daughter didn't have to struggle as much as she had been. Maybe this chance meeting with Ivy was exactly what Stella needed. He signed, "She has a school fall festival next Saturday. I know this is absolutely crazy because we just met like 2 hours ago, but would you maybe want to come and meet her? No pressure at all if that's too weird. I just think seeing you would mean the world to her." Ivy's eyes went wide and she signed, "You want me to meet your daughter after knowing me for literally 2 hours? And Bennett signed back, "You're the first person in 2 years who's made me feel like I'm not completely alone in the world. And Stella desperately needs to meet someone like you who can show her that being deaf doesn't limit what she can become. So yeah, I know it's fast, but my gut is telling me you're exactly who we need right now." Ivy was full on crying at this point, and she signed, "I would absolutely love to meet Stella. Thank you for trusting me with something that important. And Bennett, thank you for being brave enough to sign back to me. You have no idea how much this conversation has meant." Bennett signed, "Thank you for being brave enough to walk up to a stranger and ask if you could sit down. That took serious courage." And Ivy laughed and signed, "I was about 3 seconds away from chickening out. I've been standing there working up the nerve for like 5 minutes." They exchanged phone numbers and made plans for the following Saturday. And when Ivy finally left the cafe with Murray trotting beside her, Bennett sat there for another 10 minutes just staring at his phone with her contact information saved under Ivy ASL, like he needed to remind himself she was real. He drove home that evening, and for the first time in 2 years, the empty house didn't feel quite as suffocating. And he pulled out his phone and texted his mother-in-law, Rachel's mom, with shaking hands. "I think I just met someone today. I don't know what it means yet, but I felt something I haven't felt since Rachel died. Is it okay that I'm feeling this?" His phone buzzed back within 30 seconds. "Rachel would want you to feel alive again, sweetheart. Tell me about her." And Bennett typed out, "She's deaf. She signed to me at the cafe asking if she could sit down, and I think Stella really needs to meet her." He hit send and sat there on his couch in the quiet house, thinking that maybe, just maybe, life was about to get a little bit less lonely, and the thought terrified him and filled him with hope in equal measure. The following Saturday, Bennett showed up at Stella's elementary school fall festival with his daughter practically vibrating with excitement. because he'd told her that morning about meeting Ivy, and the second he'd signed, "She's deaf like you and she wants to meet you," Stella's entire face had lit up in a way he hadn't seen since before Rachel died. The festival was one of those typical school events with bouncy houses and face painting and a bake sale run by overly enthusiastic PTA moms, and Bennett watched Stella look around at all the other kids running in groups while she sat alone on a bench near the playground, doing that thing she always did where she made herself small and invisible because it was easier than trying to join in when nobody else knew how to talk to her. Bennett's heart was actively breaking, watching his 7-year-old daughter sit there picking at the grass and glancing up every few seconds to see if other kids would invite her to play, and he was about to go sit with her when he saw Ivy walking across the field with Murray, her golden retriever, service dog, keeping perfect pace beside her. Ivy spotted Bennett and waved, and the second Stella noticed this woman signing to her dad from 20 feet away, her whole body went rigid with attention, and then she was sprinting across the grass so fast Bennett barely had time to react. Stella skidded to a stop right in front of Ivy, and her hands were moving a mile a minute, signing, "You're signing, you know ASL. Are you deaf? Are you really deaf like me?" And Ivy knelt down so she was at Stella's eye level and signed back with this huge, warm smile. "Hi, Stella. I'm Ivy, and yes, I'm deaf, just like you. I've been deaf since I was 4 years old. We're exactly the same." Stella's mouth dropped open and she turned to look at Bennett with these enormous eyes and signed, "Dad, she's a grown-up and she's deaf. I didn't know deaf grown-ups existed. I thought maybe I was the only one in the whole world." Bennett felt like someone had just punched him straight in the stomach, because how had he failed his daughter so badly that she genuinely believed she was alone? That she thought being deaf meant she couldn't grow up and have a normal life, and he had to turn away for a second to collect himself. When he turned back, Stella had already grabbed Ivy's hand and was dragging her toward the bounce house, asking approximately 17 questions at once, signing about school and her favorite books, and whether Murray could do tricks, and if being deaf meant Ivy couldn't drive a car or have a job or do all the things the other moms at school did. Ivy answered every single question with patience and enthusiasm, signing about her graphic design work and her apartment and her car, and how being deaf had never stopped her from doing anything she wanted to do. And Bennett watched Stella just absolutely soak up every word like she'd been dying of thirst, and Ivy was the first water she'd seen in years. Other kids started wandering over because Murray was adorable and they wanted to pet him, and Ivy taught them basic signs like hello and thank you and friend, while Stella stood right next to her, looking proud as hell to finally be the expert on something instead of the kid who needed extra accommodations. 2 hours into the festival, Bennett was standing by the lemonade stand watching Ivy and Stella play some game involving beanbags. And Stella was laughing this full belly laugh he hadn't heard in forever. And he felt this overwhelming rush of gratitude mixed with something else he wasn't quite ready to name. Ivy glanced over and caught him staring, and she signed across the field, "Your daughter is incredible." And Bennett signed back, "So are you." And the look that passed between them made his chest feel too tight. After the festival wound down, they walked to the parking lot together, Stella holding both their hands and swinging between them, chattering about everything she'd learned. And she signed up at Ivy, "Can you come to our house for dinner? Please, please, please. I want to show you my room and my books. And Dad's kind of a terrible cook, but we can order pizza." Ivy laughed and looked at Bennett, who was clearly panicking a little, and she saved him by signing, "How about I come over once a week and I can teach you both some new signs? Would Wednesday nights work?" Stella literally jumped up and down, and Bennett mouthed the words, "Thank you," knowing Ivy could read lips perfectly. That night after Stella finally went to sleep around 9, she'd been way too wound up to settle down earlier. Bennett sat on his bed staring at the photo of Rachel on his nightstand that he'd kept in the exact same spot for 2 years. He picked up the frame and talked to it out loud, even though he felt ridiculous doing it. "I really like her, Rach. Not just because she's good with Stella, but because when I'm around her, I feel like I can breathe again. And I feel so incredibly guilty about that, because it's only been 2 years. And am I even allowed to have feelings for someone else this soon?" His phone buzzed on the nightstand, and he saw a text from Ivy that said, "Thank you for today. Stella is such a special kid, and you're doing an amazing job raising her alone." And Bennett stared at those words for a solid 10 minutes before he could make his hands work enough to type back. He wrote, "Thank you for giving her something I couldn't give her. She's never been that confident or happy. You changed something in her today." And Ivy responded immediately, "She gets that strength from watching you, I can tell. See you Wednesday." And Bennett put his phone down and looked at Rachel's photo again. And this time he turned it face down on the nightstand because he couldn't look at his dead wife while thinking about Ivy, and that felt like the worst kind of betrayal. Wednesday dinners became their new routine over the next 6 weeks. Ivy showing up at 6:30 with some kind of dessert or snack, and teaching them new signs and bringing books about deaf culture, and showing Stella YouTube videos of deaf artists and athletes and scientists doing incredible things. Stella transformed right before Bennett's eyes, started a sign language club at her school, made 2 new friends who wanted to learn ASL, came home every day buzzing with stories instead of exhausted from trying to fit into a world that wasn't built for her. Late October came around, and one Wednesday after Stella went to bed, Bennett and Ivy were sitting on the couch with mugs of tea that had gone cold while they talked. Well signed about everything and nothing. Ivy's hands moved slowly, signing, "Can I ask you something kind of personal?" And Bennett signed back, "You can ask me anything." And she took this shaky breath before signing, "Do you ever feel guilty when you're happy? Like being okay somehow means you didn't love the person you lost enough?" Bennett's hands froze midair, and he just stared at her for a second before signing, "Every single day, all the time. Yes, you feel that too." And Ivy nodded and signed, "After my parents died, I was numb for almost 3 years. And then one day I realized I'd laughed at something, and I immediately hated myself for it, like I'd betrayed them by having one moment of joy." Bennett moved closer on the couch without really thinking about it and signed, "That's exactly what it's like with Rachel. And now with you being here, I feel something shifting, and it terrifies me because what if I'm not supposed to be happy yet? What if 2 years isn't long enough?" Ivy's eyes were wet and she signed, "What do you feel when I'm here?" And Bennett's hands were shaking when he signed back, "Like I'm waking up after being asleep for 2 years. Like the world has colors again instead of just gray. Like maybe I'm allowed to be a person and not just Stella's dad or Rachel's widower." They were sitting so close now that Bennett could see the exact pattern of brown and gold in Ivy's eyes, and she signed, "That's not a bad thing. Feeling alive again." And Bennett signed, "It feels like cheating." And then they were leaning toward each other, and Bennett's brain was screaming at him, but his heart was pulling him forward. Their lips were maybe an inch apart when Bennett jerked backwards so fast he nearly fell off the couch. And he signed with messy, frantic hands, "I can't. I'm not ready. I'm so sorry, Ivy." And she signed back immediately, "Don't apologize. We don't have to rush anything. I'm not going anywhere, I promise." Bennett put his head in his hands, and Ivy rubbed his back in small circles until his breathing evened out. And when he finally looked up, he signed, "You deserve someone who isn't this broken." And Ivy signed back, "You're not broken, you're healing. There's a difference." Everything fell apart on November 2nd when Rachel's mom showed up at Bennett's house without calling first, and she walked into the kitchen and saw photos of Ivy and Stella on the fridge, candid shots from their Wednesday nights, and a selfie Stella had taken of all 3 of them, making silly faces. Bennett's mother-in-law, Linda, pointed at the photos and said, "Who is this woman? Stella talks about her constantly, Ivy this and Ivy that. Who is she to you?" And Bennett felt defensive immediately. "She's a friend, she's deaf, and she's been mentoring Stella. It's been really good for her." Linda's face went cold in that way that made Bennett feel like he was being scolded. "You're replacing my daughter with the first deaf woman you meet, using her to raise my granddaughter because it's easier than doing it yourself?" And Bennett's voice came out sharper than he meant. "I'm not replacing anyone. Stella needed a deaf role model, and Ivy has been incredible with her. Rachel would have wanted this." Linda grabbed her purse and headed for the door. Rachel was incredible. She learned an entire language for Stella. Don't you dare erase her memory. And she left before Bennett could say anything else. He stood in his kitchen feeling like he'd been hit by a truck, and his hands were shaking when he called Ivy that night and asked her not to come over for a while. Said he needed space to figure some things out. Ivy's voice on the phone was quiet and hurt. Did I do something wrong? And Bennett said, No, God, no, this is all me. I just need time. And after he hung up, he sat on his kitchen floor and cried for the first time in months. 2 weeks went by without Ivy, and Stella was absolutely miserable, signing at Bennett every single day. Why isn't Ivy coming anymore? Did I do something wrong? Is she mad at me? And Bennett lied through his teeth, signing, She's just really busy with work right now, baby. Stella looked him dead in the eye and signed, You're lying, I can see it all over your face. You pushed her away, didn't you? You got scared and you ran like you always do. And Bennett was completely floored that his 7-year-old could read him that accurately. On November 18th, while Bennett was in the shower, Stella grabbed his phone off the bathroom counter and scrolled through until she found Ivy's contact. And she texted, Please come to Thanksgiving dinner at our house. We need you, 2 o'clock on Thursday, and signed it with her dad's name. Ivy responded within minutes. Are you sure, Bennett? I don't want to intrude if you're not ready. And Stella typed back, pretending to be her father. I'm sure. Please come. I miss you. Ivy sent back a heart emoji, and I'll be there. And Stella deleted the entire text thread, put the phone back exactly where she found it, and smiled to herself, knowing she'd just fixed her dad's mess. Thanksgiving Day arrived, and Bennett was in his kitchen at 1:45 in the afternoon, burning a turkey and making a complete disaster out of mashed potatoes, while Stella set the table for 2 people. And he was so focused on trying to salvage dinner that he didn't notice his daughter had this little secretive smile on her face, like she knew something he didn't. The doorbell rang, and their whole house had a flashing light system installed, so Stella would know when someone was at the door, and she took off sprinting before Bennett could even put down the potato masher, and by the time he got to the front hallway, Stella had already thrown the door open. Ivy was standing on the porch holding a homemade pumpkin pie with Murray sitting perfectly beside her in his service vest. And she looked just as confused as Bennett felt when she saw him standing there with flour all over his shirt. Bennett's hands moved automatically, signing, What are you doing here? And Ivy signed back, looking genuinely puzzled. You texted me 3 days ago asking me to come for Thanksgiving? You said 2 o'clock. And Bennett pulled out his phone and scrolled through his messages with Ivy, and there was nothing. No texts at all for 2 weeks. He turned around to look at Stella, who was standing behind him, trying to look innocent, but failing miserably, and she signed with zero shame whatsoever. Oops, that was me. I took your phone and invited her because you were being dumb and scared, and Mom would be really mad at you right now for pushing away someone who makes you happy. Bennett signed Stella Marie Hayes. What have I told you about taking my phone? But Stella just crossed her arms and signed back. That sometimes 7-year-olds are smarter than their dads, and you should listen to me more often. Now invite Ivy in before she leaves, and you mess this up even more than you already have. Bennett looked at Ivy standing on his porch in the cold, holding a pie, and looking like she was ready to bolt at any second. And he signed, I'm so sorry. I had no idea she did this. You don't have to stay if this is too weird. But Ivy signed back, It's Thanksgiving, and I was going to spend it alone in my apartment eating frozen pizza. So unless you're actually kicking me out, I'd really like to stay. Stella grabbed Ivy's free hand and pulled her inside before Bennett could respond. And just like that, she was in his kitchen helping him rescue dinner, while Stella entertained herself in the living room, giving them space to talk. Bennett's hands were shaking while he signed, I owe you a massive apology for the last 2 weeks. My mother-in-law said some things that got in my head and made me question everything. And instead of talking to you about it, I just shut down and pushed you away. Ivy set down the knife she'd been using to cut vegetables and signed, What did she say to you? And Bennett took a breath before signing, She said I was replacing Rachel with you, that I was using you to parent Stella because it was easier than doing it myself, and that 2 years wasn't enough time to move on. Ivy's face went hard, and she signed with sharp, precise movements. First of all, I would never try to replace Rachel, and you know that. Second, Stella needed someone from her own community, not a parent substitute. And third, there is no expiration date on grief. You don't heal on anyone else's timeline. Bennett felt his eyes getting wet, and he signed, I feel guilty every single time I'm happy around you. Like being okay means I didn't love Rachel enough. And Ivy moved closer and signed, Did Rachel love you? And Bennett nodded, and Ivy signed, then she would want you to actually live your life, not just survive it. That's what love is. Dinner ended up being chaotic and kind of perfect. The turkey was dry and the potatoes were lumpy, but nobody cared because Stella was talking nonstop and Ivy was laughing at Bennett's terrible cooking and Murray was begging for scraps under the table. After Stella went to bed around 8, absolutely exhausted from excitement, Bennett and Ivy sat on the front porch wrapped in blankets watching the neighborhood houses with their lights on. And Bennett signed something he'd been too terrified to say out loud. I'm falling in love with you, and it scares me to death because I already lost one person I loved, and I don't know if I could survive that again. Ivy turned to face him and signed, You might lose me, I might lose you. That's just the risk of caring about people. But Bennett, I have been alone for 5 years since my parents died, and I would rather risk my heart breaking than guarantee spending the rest of my life isolated. Bennett kissed her right there on his porch, and it was soft and careful and full of 2 years of grief, finally making room for something new. And when he pulled back, he signed, I want to do this right. Take it slow for Stella's sake. Can you be patient with me? And Ivy signed, I've waited this long. I'm not going anywhere. 6 months later in May, the whole world looked different. Ivy had been officially part of their lives for half a year, and she came over 4 or 5 times a week. And Stella had started calling her Ivy Never Mom because nobody was trying to replace Rachel but family in that way that made it clear she belonged. Bennett's bookshop was doing better than it had in years because Ivy had redesigned his entire website and logo using her graphic design skills. And they'd started hosting monthly deaf community meetups at the shop where Stella had finally made friends her own age who signed fluently. One Sunday morning, all 3 of them were at Patty's Café at their usual table, the same corner spot where Bennett and Ivy had met 9 months earlier. And Patty came over with hot chocolates and said, You 3 look like a real family. It makes my heart happy seeing you all together like this. Stella signed to both of them. We are a family, just a different kind than before, and that's okay because Mom would want us to be happy. And Bennett had to excuse himself to the bathroom because his 7-year-old had more emotional intelligence than most adults. September 28th rolled around exactly 1 year after that first meeting, and Bennett told Ivy he was taking her somewhere special, but wouldn't say where. And when they pulled up to Patty's Cafe on a Wednesday afternoon, Ivy signed, Why are we here on a random Wednesday? This is our Sunday spot. Bennett took her hand and led her inside to their corner table, the same exact spot where she'd walked up a year ago and asked if she could join him. They sat down and ordered coffee, and Ivy kept looking around like she was waiting for an explanation. And Bennett's hands moved slowly, signing, Exactly 1 year ago, you walked up to this table where I was sitting alone feeling sorry for myself, and you signed 5 words that changed my entire life. You asked if you could join me. Ivy's eyes were already filling up, and Bennett slid out of the booth and got down on one knee right there in the middle of the cafe, and he pulled out a ring and signed one-handed. We don't have to be alone anymore. I don't want to be alone anymore. Ivy, will you marry me? Ivy was full-on sobbing and nodding and signing yes, yes, 1,000 times yes. And the entire cafe erupted in applause, and Patty came running over crying and hugging them both. They got married that next spring at the Botanical Gardens, with Stella as junior bridesmaid and Murray as the ring bearer with the rings attached to his vest. And the entire ceremony was conducted in ASL with a voice interpreter for the hearing guests. Bennett's vows signed in front of everyone were, You taught me that loving you doesn't erase loving Rachel. It just means my heart grew big enough for both. You gave me permission to live again. And Ivy's vows were, You saw me when I felt invisible. You gave me a family when I thought I'd always be alone. I promise to love you and Stella with everything I have. 2 years after the wedding, Bennett and Ivy and Stella, who was now 11, were closing up the bookshop on a random Tuesday evening. And Ivy had started teaching ASL classes twice a week for hearing parents who had deaf kids, and the community they'd built was thriving. They were walking to their car when a young deaf woman, maybe 19 or 20, stopped Ivy on the sidewalk, and her hands moved hesitantly, signing, Excuse me, I'm sorry to bother you, but I just moved to Portland 2 weeks ago, and I don't know anyone here, and I'm so lonely. I saw you signing, and I just needed to talk to someone who would understand. Ivy's whole face lit up, and she signed, I know exactly that feeling. I moved here 3 years ago and felt the same way. We're actually about to grab dinner. Do you want to join us?" And the young woman's expression transformed from desperate to hopeful in half a second. And Bennett watched his wife pay forward the same kindness someone had shown her 3 years ago in a cafe when she'd asked a stranger if she could sit down. Sometimes the bravest thing you can do is admit you're lonely and ask someone to let you in. Ivy walked up to a stranger in a cafe and signed 5 simple words, and those words changed 3 entire lives. Bennett learned that moving forward doesn't mean forgetting the past. It means honoring the people we lost by choosing to keep living fully and loving deeply. Stella learned that being different isn't being broken, it's being exactly who you're meant to be, and the world needs to make space for all of us. If this story reminded you that connection takes courage, that it's okay to ask for help, that we're all just looking for someone who sees us, go ahead and hit that subscribe button. Share this with someone who's afraid to reach out, afraid to try again, afraid they're too different or too damaged to be loved, because you're not alone. None of us are. We just have to be brave enough to ask. Thanks for being here with us today.